Hey there, BookTube. So this is part 2 of my 4-month wrap-up, encompassing everything I've read from my last wrap-up in March to the end of July. If you've yet to watch part 1 of this wrap-up, please do so. The link will be in the description. This will make a whole lot more sense if you do. If you haven't, I'll just quickly give you the gist of things. I haven't made a wrap-up since March, so these videos are covering everything I've missed telling you about since then. Since I've read several series throughout this time period, I'm not necessarily doing these wrap-ups in chronological order of what I read in order. I'm doing whole series of what I've read so far of them at once, since I read them kind of dispersed throughout the other books. This is why these are not like April wrap-up, May wrap-up, June wrap-up, July wrap-up, but just one big wrap-up split over 4 parts. So the first thing that I'll be discussing in this video is the Chaos Walking Trilogy by Project Ness. This includes The Knife of Never Letting Go, The Ask and the Answer, and Monsters of Men. The premise of this series is pretty interesting, but overall was just kind of okay for me. If you don't know about it already, the series is about a boy named Todd, the last boy left to become a man in a place called Prenticetown, on a world where men can hear each other's thoughts at all times. It's called noise, and it's just something that's always there, something that can always be heard around everyone. Words, images, etc. can and are just all projected out from their minds to the other men around them. And this happens with animals too, such as Todd's dog, whom I actually like as a character more than some other characters in the series. Prenticetown is without women, and there's some sort of initiation that people of Prenticetown uphold in order to go from being a boy to manhood, and Todd must do it. There's a lot of mystery surrounding everything happening in this town where the women, why can they hear each other's thoughts, why is everyone so obsessed with Todd becoming a man and entering into manhood, what is happening on the rest of this world, etc. It just got a lot of really interesting ideas, but for me it just felt like something was missing. It does bring up some good themes, but in my opinion doesn't really follow through with them, doesn't explore them all that much. It introduces them, but they stay fairly one-dimensional in the grand scheme of things. And I think this is a problem with kind of a lot of the characters too. Todd is a little difficult to get used to. He's kind of a mess, and that seems to be all he is a lot of the time, at least at first. These books definitely got a bit better as they went along, though I think I gave them all around a 3 to 3.5. A lot of stuff happens in each book, but I think the plot, when you really think about it, basically stays the same throughout most of the second and third books. But the characters do get better. Todd rounds out quite a bit and gets a bit more added to his personality. Same with Viola, another main character, and especially the main antagonist, Mayor Prentice. Now, he's a really well-written character. There are many different things going on with him. He's unpredictable, but still consistent. He can get seriously annoying, but definitely has a lot more depth than any of the other characters. I did enjoy listening to the series. I listened to them all on audiobook, and I would say give it a shot if you want to. Honestly, it wasn't great, but it was still fun and intriguing enough. I feel like the audiobook narrator did more to bring the characters and the story to life, sometimes than the writing did. Next is the first 2 books in the Song of the Lioness Quartet, Alana and In the Hand of the Goddess. So far, the series has been good. I gave both 3.5 to 4-ish stars. They surround a young girl named Alana and her twin brother Tom, whom both want what the other has. Alana is supposed to learn magic, and Tom is supposed to learn how to become a knight. But Alana wants to become a knight, and Tom wants to be a sorcerer, so they switch. We follow Alana as she disguises herself as a boy in order to become a knight. She is trained with all the other boys and makes friends with all of them, especially Prince Jonathan. This is a really enjoyable read so far, for the most part, with some really fun adventure, good characters, good writing, a little jerky in the plot department, and kind of rushed sometimes, but that makes it pretty fast-paced, and I definitely enjoyed listening to it. I had a few problems with the second book, though. Just while the story was pushed forward for sure and were made interesting and the characters were still well written, I felt like a lot of the writing was kind of lazy and, again, rushed and clunky. It bothers me also, like others have pointed out in plenty of other reviews for this book, that it's technically a kid's book and has characters just kind of randomly having sex with each other all of a sudden. Like, it skips ahead in time a bunch and barely gives you time to register that Alana's character isn't still 12 or 13 or whatever it is she starts at. And also just the romance in that second book in general is just really weird and sort of feels out of place in comparison to the first book. I still like the series well enough though, and I'm definitely going to be reading the next two sometime soon. Giselle and I listened to the first book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, Dealing with Dragons by Patricia C. Reedy, together on our way to Disney World and at Disney World. This is Giselle's favorite series. She's listened to it a ton of times, knew a lot of it by heart, and just has a ton of memories with it. And I try not to let that kind of compromise my own personal feelings towards it as we went into it, but honestly, it was really, really easy to enjoy this book. I really liked it a lot. I gave it 4 stars. The characters are awesome, the writing is hilarious, the story as a whole is a lot of fun. We follow Cimarine, a princess with parents that, of course, want to marry her off, but this book and this whole series just has this great twist of kind of being a parody of fairy tales and the like. Her parents would just love to find the best way for a prince to come and go out and save her. This is normal for princesses in this story, of course, lock her in a tower, for instance. Cimarine is forced to learn all of these mundane, useless things and is just fed up with it. She goes behind her parents' backs and learns things like fencing, magic, fighting, Latin. The people around her, her parents, her fairy godmother, her sisters, are all just kind of useless, and she longs to be something more than a princess. So that's what she sets out to do. Cimarine ends up talking her way into the company of dragons, and hilarity ensues as various princes attempt to rescue her, only to find out that that is the absolute last thing that she wants. This story is just so much fun. The characters seriously rock. Cimarine is awesome, and the dragon, specifically one called Kazul, is really awesome. Cimarine is very energetic, and the book just kind of moves at all times and always remains interesting and clever. And it really is clever. There are so many great moments in this, and it's just a really good story. I can already easily tell why Giselle loves this series and why it was so important to her growing up. I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Next, I'd like to talk about Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I said in my Goodreads review that I struggled a lot with what to rate this book, and that still hasn't really changed at all. I give it like a 3 on Goodreads ultimately, but there are certain ways of looking at it that could make it a 3.5 or even a 4, and I enjoyed the audiobook. It's narrated by one of my favorite narrators, Jim Gerard Reynolds, who narrates all the Weird books, and the writing is good, fairly fast-paced, accessible, but not too simplistic. The characters were really lacking though. The plot remained really static throughout most of it. Very repetitive, it felt like. I liked Darrow, the main character. He is a red on Mars, meaning he does mining on the planet in order to make it habitable. It's a dangerous profession and the Reds don't live well, and he discovers though that everything he knows is basically a lie. Mars is already livable and has a rich kingdom-like society built on it, filled with people that call themselves the Golds. Darrow eventually teams up with some rebels that help him to infiltrate the Golds. And the Golds basically have absolutely zero respect for life or concern for life or anything like that. And therein lies some of my biggest problems with this story and its world building. There's a whole lot of death just for the sake of it, really, just to kill lots of people off. It seems so pointless after a while and becomes really, really repetitive. I swear certain plot points feel like they're repeated over and over again. The characters are just doing the same thing over and over for a while to fill up space. I did have a really good connection to Darrow at the beginning, he and his wife and their story. I really enjoyed learning about that and seeing like what motivated Darrow and kept him going, but that kind of fell flat at some point. It just kind of drops away and that connection to him just fades off as what I felt and motivated him basically does the same. I think this is a pretty interesting story despite its problems and despite not feeling all that original. I already have the second book, Golden Sun, and we'll get to that eventually to see if I want to continue with the series. The next book is probably one of my favorites of the year so far, and that is The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery by Gabrielle Zevin. It's one of those books for book lovers, so I'm sure you've probably heard of it. I really loved it a lot. It just gave me a lot of really good feelings, made me really happy. It was just a really, really nice story. It's moving in a sort of sappy way that I actually really love a lot. A.J. Fickery is a bit testily, especially since he's been through a lot recently. He owns a bookstore and the book opens with a new sales rep from a lesser-known publisher meeting him to show him that season's catalog of books. A.J.'s bad attitude is something to behold, and the sales rep gets a pretty big dose of it. His bookstore isn't doing well, there's been a recent tragedy in his life, and one of his books, a collection of Edgar Allan Poe poems that's worth a lot of money, has been stolen. To add to that, something very unexpected is left to him on the bookstore's doorstep, and he's forced to deal with it. This book just has a lot of heart. The characters are all really great, the writing is awesome, and overall I just love what this book loves and what it's doing. I love the references it makes, references to things I'm sure most of you will get, considering you're on BookTube right now, and probably even more that I didn't get that you would. I love how much it so openly celebrates books and readers and reading, and I highly recommend it. 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook and it was really awesome too, and I definitely suggest giving it a shot. I also read Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan, which is sort of similar in that it's a book for book lovers. I gave this one 4 stars. I enjoyed it, but not as much as A.J. Thackeray. I didn't read these back to back, by the way, so I wasn't really comparing them when I read this one. They're just in the same category, I'd say, and I thought it makes sense to talk about them both right now. This one was just as enjoyable, but I didn't love it quite as much. Anyway, it follows a guy named Clay, who used to be a full-time designer, but due to the economy and other troubles has somehow landed a job at Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. He works the late shift mostly, as it's open 24 hours, and just finds this bookstore to be absurdly bizarre. The store itself and its consumers, many odd people walk in, check out, like a library, these weird, obscure books, and Mr. Penumbra has Clay write down in a log very specific details about each encounter and who it was with. Clay begins to use this log to sort of investigate the strange behavior of the store's many regular patrons, and to investigate the store and Mr. Penumbra himself, which leads him to some very interesting things. It's definitely got some hints of magical realism to it, which I really enjoyed because it also very much has a foot in the real world, the contemporary world, because Clay meets a girl that works at Google and absolutely loves her job like crazy, and she opens him up to a lot of different resources through the magic of Google. There's a whole lot of references to the point where it actually becomes a bit tedious sometimes to various contemporary real-world things like Google, an excessive amount at times. Overall though, this was a really fun read and I definitely enjoyed it. The characters weren't quite as fleshed out as they could have been, but I really like the story, and once again that this book is for book lovers. It celebrates reading and books and also technology and the fantastical too. It's got some cliches and tropes, but all things considered, it's absolutely worth reading if you love reading, and books, and bookstores. So this next book I honestly never really had any intention to read, until I saw the trailer for its movie adaptation. It's this really weird case where the movie looks so well made that I just had to pick up the book. Granted, I still haven't seen the movie yet, but I want to, because I definitely enjoyed the book more than I ever thought I would before seeing the movie trailer. And this is Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews. Awkward teenage boy is forced to become friends with awkward teenage girl with leukemia. Awkward teenage boy has a really hard time being friends with anyone, being anything with anyone really, and only has one friend that he makes ridiculous remakes of films with. The awkward teenage boy character, Greg, actually felt pretty realistic to me. Selfish, self-centered, angsty, yes, but pretty realistic and consistent to who he's written to be. He's immature and doesn't ever pretend that he isn't. Same goes for the other characters. They never pretend to be something that they're not. They're just characters existing in their own personal lives. They're well-written characters. There isn't a whole lot of plot, and the story kind of meanders a bit, which is fine. It's kind of presented in that way from the get-go, and I don't think it misleads you into believing it'll ever be otherwise. And it's pretty humorous and definitely handles a character with leukemia and handles other characters reacting to her leukemia pretty well. I think it goes a bit overboard sometimes with some characters and the way they speak, but overall I did enjoy listening to this audiobook. We're almost done with this part. 2 more left. First, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is a really, really beautiful written book. It's also pretty slow, and I didn't mind this most of the time, but at times I didn't feel quite as absorbed in the story as I would have liked to be. Everything sounded very magical though. Characters, places, things, and all just had this really great voice in the writing, whimsical but grounded in reality. The magic that's actually done in the book isn't explained all that much, how it works and what's possible and all that, but overall this was definitely enjoyable. Basically, this 6-year-old girl named Celia is volunteered by her father into some sort of competition, a competition that's left about that vague throughout most of the book, to both us and to Cecilia, and her competitor Marco, an orphan boy who was also put into this competition by his guardian at a very young age. They are trained in many various ways to face off against one another, though they don't know in what way they'll eventually meet the other. In the background, yet somehow also in the foreground, is the Night Circus, a circus that, as the name suggests, only opens at night. It arrives and it begins, without warning, and both Celia and Marco are a part of it, and thus it becomes the backdrop of contests perpetuated and instigated by their borderline obsessive magical mentors. It's got a whole lot of interesting ideas, characters, and writing, and I really enjoyed it, as do most people, I think. Honestly, I'm sure you've heard of it already, and if you haven't made the decision to just go ahead and pick it up and try it, I definitely suggest that you do. The very last book in part 2 of this wrap-up is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. This was available to listen through my library on Overdrive, so I just thought, meh, why not? I thought that I might as well see what all the hype is about. I knew the basic idea of what it's about, but just really wanted to give it a shot. Basically, we read from two different perspectives, Nick in present time and his wife Amy in various journal entries that have been written throughout their marriage. Amy goes missing on their 5-year anniversary, and people can't help but see Nick as sort of bitter, deceitful, a vague kind of guy, and they of course must question whether or not he is responsible for Amy's disappearance. And then lots of craziness ensues. It's a roller coaster ride, really. Fast-paced, very difficult to stop reading. It kind of consistently compels you to keep going, to find out what the heck is going on, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. Any book that makes me feel that way has to at least get 3 stars. I give this somewhere around 3 to 3.5, though it could go as low as 2.5 the more I think about it. I don't know. The writing is good. It's a well-written book and just non-stop go for the most part. The characters are fairly well-written, albeit a little nauseating. I can't really get behind the message of this book. I mean, it may not be the message necessarily, but it just makes me cringe, and reading it made me just not feel good. I enjoyed reading it, but also just didn't enjoy reading it because of its outlook on love and marriage and couples and people and husbands and wives and women and men and just everything. I hated this book's outlook on pretty much everything, but still couldn't help listening to it nonstop. Does that make sense? Anyway, that's all for this video. Part 3 will be out tomorrow, so stick around for that. Look out for it. Watch it. Watch part 1 if you haven't already. There are 48 books total that I'm talking about, split up over 4 videos. Lots of little mini reviews, which I hope you guys enjoy and are enjoying already. If you have any comments on these books, on anything that I said or brought up, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow with part 3.